So when you can buy in a market that is diverse in its employment, it's undervalued, it's got a great cost of living, and it's got cash flow, it's really hard to compare that to other markets. They can tick a few of those boxes, but really Texas and Florida are the only markets that truly offer that.
This show is brought to you today by Lightbulb Podcasting. Are you a busy professional that needs to get more time back in their schedule? If you are a podcaster like me, you have enough on your plate. Why not outsource your podcast production? From editing, show notes, keywords, scheduling, volume balancing, and editing, and creating audiograms, podcast production is another job in and of itself. That's why I use Lightbulb Podcasting. Get phenomenal support at an affordable price while you concentrate on growing your brand. Go to www.lightbulbpodcasting.com today to schedule an introductory call. Put your content in the spotlight.
Are you tired of the 9-to-5 lifestyle? Do you want more freedom to do what you want, when you want it, without sacrificing your current income? Then this is the show for you. Every week, we dive into John's journey towards financial freedom and everything he has learned since 2014. Real estate investing, cryptocurrency, stocks, private lending, foreign residency, tax saving strategies, infinite banking, assets protection, and much more. Now, here is your host, the founder of the Wealth and Freedom Nexus, John Rickgarn.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when you're listening to this. This is John Rickgarn, your host, as always, of the Wealth and Freedom Nexus podcast. Now, for those that have followed me from the beginning, you know that I have invested in Arizona, Alabama, Minnesota, Iowa, and Tennessee. I'm personally looking at Florida and Ohio in the near future. And one market I kind of just wrote off myself a number of years ago, I didn't think I'd ever look at again, was Texas, just for a variety of reasons that we'll get into later. But as I started researching more, I found a great company that's been in business for, I believe, over 15 years. Maybe she can correct me once we get into this. But I wanted to bring on Leah Slaughter, one of the co-owners of OmniKey Real Estate. Leah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Now, Leah, just looking quick at your bio, I understand now you and your husband founded the company. You're real estate agents, you're real estate investors as well. And you've, I don't know, how many doors do you have at this point under management?
A lot. So my husband and I started the company almost 17 years ago.
Okay.
And we're high volume investors ourselves. So we bought something like 80 properties in the last 24 months. And that's
wow.
a mix of commercial, small multifamily, and single family. So It's a lot. We represent almost 20% of the company. We third party manage somewhere around 1,500 properties as well.
Wow. Okay. And now, is that all, those 1,500, is that all in-house that you manage, or is that outsourced to a completely different company, or?
Oh, no, everything's in-house under one roof. It was very important to us that everything remained under one roof so we could be accountable to it.
Yeah.
And so that it followed our model, which, that's, I think, where a lot of people go wrong, is that they trust other people to have their vision. And that's not always the way it works out.
Well, and I haven't really seen it myself firsthand, but I've just heard so many stories where, company A does the purchasing, rehabbing, whatever, and then company B does the property management, and then something goes wrong, and then company B is pointing fingers at company A, and company A is pointing fingers at company B, and then the investor's just stuck in the middle. It's like, I just want this investment to perform, and no one's, taking the bull by the horns and correcting the issue. So
it's true. And a lot of people do that to skirt licensing and insurance requirements. And so we see that a lot, but everything that we do is licensed and regulated in our state. And so it's a little bit different model in that aspect too.
Okay, sounds good. Now, I know you said you and your husband have been in business now for 17 years. Maybe you can just take us back and, how you got started, or how the company got started. Were you investors first and then started the company, or how did that all come about?
So we bought our first house at 18.
Okay.
And we both had corporate jobs, and we were not the norm, right? We graduated early, top of our class, and just kind of jumped right into business, owned our first business at 15.
Wow.
And so we bought our first house at 18, and we worked with an agent, and they didn't want to let me negotiate. And for those who know me, know that I'm a tough negotiator, and it kind of got our wheels turning about, well, why would you buy something that wasn't an investment?
Right.
We really in the back of our mind figured that might be the largest investment we ever made. Certainly was at the time. And I had been raised around real estate. I come from a family that had done nothing but real estate. And so really, Michael came to me about 30 days later and said, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to go get a real estate license and we're going to go into rentals. And I said to him, and he's never let me live it down, you're crazy. So what does he do? He quits his job, goes into real estate, and starts walking door to door. And we knew that Dallas was going to boom, right? We were both born and raised here. We were middle school sweethearts. We'd seen the city grow. And we knew that the highway expansion was going to drive the growth. We could see what was coming. And so we got in doing flat fee listings and broker price opinions for all of the banks that later imploded. And so we had a unique perspective of what was to come. So we started at 19 years old calling that the market was going to crash.
Wow.
And a lot of people thought we were dumb kids, but we hedged our investors against the crash by having them buy along, where we assumed two different highways were going to expand. And so we didn't have anyone lose money in the crash. And we just kind of exponentially took off from there. Now, what happened was a lot of companies started doing really bad stuff. And so we kind of became known as the fixers. And we started taking over hundreds and hundreds of properties where people had bought from either turnkey providers or had bought properties with some of these really shady loans where, investors were walking away from closing with 3% back. They weren't bringing any money to close. It was why anybody thinks the market wasn't going to crash based on that. I couldn't understand it. We were being asked to value properties that they were asking us to value them for double what the comp supported. It was asinine at the time. And so, what we've seen now on the backside is that fixer mentality that we took on really solidified our place in the market. And of course, we didn't charge people for that, right? We helped them. Many were in bankruptcy, many were in delinquency. And so we either got renters in place and helped them restructure, or we helped them short sale. And it really just kind of boomed, and we were growing 100, 200, 300% every year over year.
Wow.
And so you jump forward to today, and a lot of those original customers are still with us, which I just think is really cool.
Wow, that's impressive. Yeah. I'm a big fan of the movie The Big Short, and I've seen all those liar loans, ninja loans. I don't know how anyone thought negative amortization loans would pan out. The most stupid thing I've ever heard. But yeah, a lot of people were saying, oh, real estate always goes up and never crashes, and then boom, there we were. And so.
And Dallas was lucky, DFW was lucky, because we really just kind of went stagnant. We were so undervalued for the size of our market, kind of like we are now, that it gave a lot of insulation. But I had clients who they'd invested in Vegas and Orlando and New York, and they lost their shirts.
Yeah. And I think I don't have this in front of me. I thought I read a month or two ago, it wasn't so much the Dallas-Fort Worth market, but just Texas in general had some, some additional regulations that they had in regards to some of the mortgages that like the Californias, Las Vegas, Floridas didn't have, so that help them not to crash as much. Do you know anything about that? Or?
Yeah, so we have different rules about like cash outs and things like that as it pertains to owner occupancy. Yeah, and right now the average homeowner has $50,000 more in equity than they did a year or 2 years ago, and so we're very stable, and we have been all along. But we do have laws that kept people from being able to borrow on a cash out against the full value of their home, and I think that definitely made a difference. But the bigger piece was our properties were so cheap to begin with. We were selling rental properties that were 2-3 years old for $90,000. Wow. And even if you go back to 2012, 2014, we were still buying new construction around $100,000, $110,000. So,
oh, man.
Yeah. Anyone who looked at Dallas and really did the research on our size relative to the other large metros, it was pretty black and white. We were just undervalued, and so that helped.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, if we just had a time machine to go back to that and buy up all the properties.
Hey, some of us did.
Exactly. Yeah, obviously you and your husband did. So now just a kind of a quick question. What does OmniKey stand for? Is there a meaning behind that, or how did that name come about?
So when we decided to get into real estate, I went and I bought a used Jaguar so that when I was out showing, when you're 18 in business and people are trusting you with millions of dollars, you're like, what can I do? So I didn't look 18, which that helped, but I decided to go buy a used, really nice car because I figured it would at least give that exude of success, which we had, but not in real estate yet. It worked. But so we buy this car and we go to clean it the first time and we find an old skeleton key under the doormat. And we had really strange, right? Or under the floor mat. And so then the new house that we had just bought, we found 2 old antique keys in this like 5-year-old house. So now we're thinking, okay, something's very strange here. And we we're walking from restaurants, finding keys, all these crazy things. And we're like, okay, well, the company name has to have key in it, obviously. And the Omni really represents that we do everything. We knew there was a lot of segmenting in the business, right? There were people that only did rentals and most people hated rentals. No one wanted to touch them. Property management was very taboo back then. And they just wanted to be that buyer and seller's agent. And so Omni was to represent that we're here for every stage of the journey, not just the ones that pay the most.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I was just curious myself where the name came from, so I just had to ask that.
I don't know that anyone's ever asked me that on an interview, and I do so many. I love that question.
Okay, yeah, I typically I try to throw in a couple like, oh, I've listened to this person on numerous other interviews, and no one's asked this, so I kind of like to throw curveballs, so to speak.
I love it. If you come to my house or my office, there are keys everywhere, hanging on the walls and antique rings. It's it's a thing now.
Okay, good to know. So now maybe kind of taking a step back, and I'm just looking big picture, and obviously in the Dallas-Fort Worth market, but maybe I don't know if you can speak to that MSA or maybe even just Texas as a whole. For, like I said, myself, I kind of wrote off Texas just for, I saw some pricing. I thought they were unreasonable. I've heard that there's high property taxes, and I didn't have any luck finding a good turnkey provider that I trusted. But, if an investor is listening to this and is thinking about Texas, but doesn't know anything about Texas, why should investors look at that market versus a Florida or Ohio or whatever the state may be?
So first and foremost, arguably, North Texas is the strongest market in the United States.
Okay.
There's a lot of reasons why. I could spend hours talking about that, but let me break it down into the simplest form that I can. Number one, we're completely diverse in our economy, meaning that there's no one sector that drives our jobs and what we have here. And so you could have one major employer close and it really doesn't matter because there's so many jobs. Okay. We have right now more jobs than we have people to fill them, even though we have the largest relocation happening right now in history. And so really that employment, and when you look at the numbers and the average pay of that employment, it's through the roof. So these are a lot of tech jobs, high paying jobs. And that's something which leads me into number two, we have a very low cost of living. When you come to North Texas or Texas as a whole, what you'll find is these big fancy highways with shopping everywhere, outdoor venues and indoor malls and all of these different places and these garden high rises with stores on the first floor. It's insane. And the reason why we have that is, again, because we have a lower cost of living. Okay. So when you look at number three, why Texas is so just unique is all these companies moving here, they're moving here because of financial reasons, right? So sure. There's the enterprise fund, which literally quite pays them to come here and builds little mini cities. You look at, State Farm and what City Line is in Richardson, or what happened up by Toyota and Frisco and Liberty Mutual. They're building these mini cities to have their people here, and the cities are paying a fortune to do all this infrastructure to support the growth. Okay. So they're incentivizing them by coming here, but then in addition, they're coming here, their employees can make the same or less and live like they're earning 5 to 10 times more. Now, why is that? Our average home price here is still most places around $250,000 up to $300,000. Okay. And our city is such that we grow in the suburbs. And so if you look at our other big competitors, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, so those are all the other markets of our size. So that right there should be a key sign, right? Yeah. Because we're competing against, places where you have to spend $1 million to get a decent home. So for us, you can come here, make the same or make a little less, which that's why these employers are coming, and be able to live anywhere in the city because the jobs are all coming to the suburbs. If you look at the Fortune 500s that relocated here, almost 100% of them are in the suburbs. And all of the development and all the newsworthy items you see, it's not talking about the city of Dallas. It's talking about Frisco and Plano and Sherman. Okay. And so that's where we all focus our investment journey on. So secondary to that, we're able to buy in more areas that artificially keeps prices lower because there's more land mass to build on to be able to move around. We've got the second largest number of highway miles per capita in the United States. And so, you know, it's a very different landscape. You go to LA, you need to live and work in LA.
Yep.
And so for you to make that commute, it's an hour and you can't find employment where you live. Here, you can live anywhere, commute anywhere. We don't have the traffic problems everywhere else does. And most likely your employer's not even in the city because no one wants to live in the city. You know, you want the nice, new, fancy, cheaper stuff. That's all out in the burbs. So that's where your better schools are. That's where your shopping is. So the entire lifestyle of living in North Texas is stable. Okay. But beyond all of that, we are undervalued. At the end of the day, you look at North Texas home prices against every other market. We are far superior in our potential for performance than anywhere else. And there's more than one way to make money. You go to Chicago, things are pretty stagnant, right? Sure. So Chicago has non-landlord friendly laws, and I could tell you 100 reasons why I'm not a fan, right? I'm biased too, but there's a lot of things about Chicago that are different. And one of the reasons why is you're buying based on cash flow. And when you look at a cash flow market, the numbers look great on paper. The problem is if the state's laws don't support you as a landlord to have the best return possible, whatever cash flow you have is going to be eaten up when you have situations with evictions or when you have move outs. And if you have to go to court to be able to take a tenant's deposit, that's a problem. Sure. And so for us, we look at cash flow, but we also look at the other pieces. So one is going to be appreciation, which anyone who's been watching Dallas, it's been insane. Right. We had 20 to 30% most areas last year. Zillow had to retract. They came out and said they thought we were going to have 16%. We're all like, okay, sure. And then they retracted, and then they retracted again. Now we're up to, I think, 22% is what they're calling for. But nobody really knows because what's happening is these buyers are loaded. They're selling houses in California. They're selling houses in New York. They're coming here with lots of cash, and they're not going to be beat out if the house is only 300 grand. So they don't care if they pay 360 or 370, because in reality, that's probably what they're worth. And so I read an article last week. The average home has over 50 offers. Wow. It's crazy. Yeah. But the thing I think that is the most important takeaway is when you're doing real estate investment, all of us invest in real estate because it's supposed to be the safest avenue. You invest in a stock, it can go down to zero. You invest in real estate, even if it burns to the ground, you can insure against that loss, and it's got land value.
Yeah, so exactly.
It's all about safety and security. And, you know, there's no crystal balls, there's no guarantees. All real estate is subject to the potential loss or risk. But real estate, it's about buying the safest avenue you can. So when you can buy in a market that is diverse in its employment, it's undervalued, it's got a great cost of living, and it's got cash flow, it's really hard to compare that to other markets. They can tick a few of those boxes, but really Texas and Florida are the only markets that truly offer that.
This show is brought to you today by Timothy Hero with Hero Mortgages. Did you know traditional lenders cap you at no more than 10 rental loans in your name? Many have complicated underwriting processes, and if you are self-employed, even more documentation and income verification is needed. Why not work with a loan broker that can get you the best terms with an unlimited amount of loans for your investment properties? 30-year fixed rates starting at 5.8%. These loans do not report on your credit report, can be done right in an LLC, and can be used for 1 to 30 unit properties or portfolios, all with faster closing times and less documentation than a traditional lender will require. Check out episode number 17 for more info, or go to timothyhero.com to get a quote today.
And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but Texas still does not have an income tax. Is that correct?
No. Okay. No, and we won't. There's been a lot of steps taken, and there's a lot of people out there saying, well, Texas is turning blue and they're going to change all these laws.
Yeah,
it's just not true. It's just not happening.
Yeah, and in a past life, interesting, you mentioned Chicago before. I sold copiers for 12 years, and one of my coworkers who was in our Illinois office, he just kind of got up and moved to Texas and worked for another company. And I was just oh, okay, maybe it was the warm weather. And I was chatting with him on LinkedIn one time, and he actually sat down and figured out what he was paying in income taxes, whatever it was in Chicago, and comparing that to Texas. And he's like, yeah, I figure I'm going to save about $300,000 by the time I retire. And
Yep.
I mean, I don't care who you are. I think that's pretty substantial.
Put it into perspective. Your average home's property taxes are going to be $300 to $400 a month when they reset fully to value.
Okay.
Where are you going to live with the state income tax where you're paying less than that?
Yeah. It all kind of balances out. I mean, there might be one tax that's a little higher, but if you just look at it holistically, I can see that making a lot of sense there. So, all right. So I've been on your mailing list per se for the last month or I don't know, so on and so forth. And I've seen, you mentioned a few, but there's suburbs of, Arlington, Grand Prairie, Greenville, Gun Barrel City. I think I just want to buy a property there just to say I have a property in Gun Barrel City. Watauga, Waxahachie, and I could, I'm not going to go through the whole list, but are all these, I know you mentioned suburbs, but are these like within 30-mile radius of Dallas-Fort Worth, or farther than that, or
so they're all part of Dallas-Fort Worth. That's the great thing. We're not buying outside of the metro. We're buying suburbs that are in the metro, but many of them serve as their own MSAs. And what that means is they have their own employment centers, they have their own benefits. And so people can choose to live and work in that area, or they can commute 20, 30 minutes to even more large employers. So let me give you an example. Sherman-Denison is about 40 minutes from the heart of Dallas. So from the heart of, Dallas-Richardson, it's about a 40-minute drive right up the highway, real easy. And Sherman is the fastest growing MSA in Texas. But the interesting piece about that is they're also drivable into Plano, McKinney, and all these other areas. But Sherman has Texas Instruments, it has Finisar, it has Tyson Foods. We're talking mega employers here. And that's the type of thing that we're looking for. And that's the difference between Dallas and the other major markets, is that our suburbs have major employers because they want to be there too. It's cheaper for them, just like it's cheaper for their people. And what we find is you'll have an employer relocate, which that's been, if there's one tagline for Texas, it's employer relocation. And the employer relocates, but then all the companies that they work with start relocating too. And so you may have one employer go to Plano, but all the little companies they work with can't afford Plano. So they're going to go the next county north, and that's Sherman, Denison, or if they go east, that's Greenville. And so we're really not only seeing the benefit of the big companies coming, but all of the little companies that they work with too. And then, of course, new small business is massive here. We're the small business capital. And so the companies that want to work with these companies also open here. And that leads us back to our job issue where we go get breakfast and they can't find waiters and waitresses because nobody has to do that right now. And that's what Texas is in a nutshell.
Wow. Okay. Very good. Yeah, it looks like from what you described, that's probably not going to be slowing down anytime soon. Or
no, it's getting worse. Actually, it's progressively. A lot of people in the beginning attributed it to COVID and said, "Well, people just don't want to go back to work, or they don't want to work. They're working from home." But that's really not what's happening. What's happening is, why would you go work in a $15, $16 net an hour job when there's $140,000 or $50,000 a year of jobs for people with no background or education?
Wow.
I can tell you, just at my company, we don't even have entry level anymore. We've completely disbanded it because if we're going to have to pay X, Y, or Z for entry level, why not hire all professional level for a little more? And I'm not the only one doing that. And so there's this mass movement of people that didn't go to college and aren't high educated and don't have great employment histories being able to make a great income. And it's not unique to Texas. I've seen it in Florida too, but it's certainly happening. Okay,
interesting. And you mentioned obviously with the growth that you've seen with OmniKey as of the, I don't know if you have an exact number, but as of right now, what are you, how many doors do you currently manage for investors, and how do you see that growing by the end of 2022?
So we actually are not in a growth phase, which is interesting because if you look back to the beginning of COVID, we were growing 8% a month. And we kind of went back to the drawing board and said, okay, we can keep growing and we can keep doing this, but where are our goals and what, for me and my husband being family owned and operated, what is the quality of life that we're looking for? And so we did go back to the drawing board and we said, this is not sustainable and it's not where we want to be. I've been very blessed that my husband and I make a fantastic living and I don't have to work anymore. I do it because I love it. I could have retired years ago. Just
Wow.
my portfolio alone would have allowed that. And so I do this because I love it. And so for me, it was very much about working with the people who shared the joy of the industry and believe in the model and believe in the market. And so we really, our model is very unique, right? So we help people buy property. And when that property's value goes up and the equity pays down, what we do is we 1031 exchange, and then we turn 1 into 2, 2 into 4, so on and so on. And so people are quite literally retiring with us. And then we had the customers who would buy a property that was, they thought a good deal with someone else, and then bring it to us to manage. And we were having to fix all of those issues. And it became a lot. And so the vast majority of the new business that was driving the crazy growth were those troubled properties. And we just kind of as a company came together and said that we're really going to focus on our model, and we're going to help people who are receptive to that model, but we're going to start to back away from some of these more difficult properties. And so we did. And so, we're still adding 50, 60 units a month, but because of that 1031 process and the exit piece, we're netting maybe 20 to 30 a month gain, which for us is nothing. So yeah, we could be at about 10,000 units right now if I wanted to be. I've been offered to open in every major market. And, it's funny, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have been all over it. And you asked me now.
Sure. Yep. And
priorities. COVID kind of made all of us reprioritize our lives, I feel like. And I feel like for me, I'd rather have 100% of me to give to 1,400 customers than to have, spread and spread and spread. And so I also believe that our market is what allows us to do what we do. And so although I would love to operate in other areas and do those expansions, I don't have the joy and the passion for those other areas like I do for Texas. So we cover about 70% of Texas, and that's where we're going to stay.
Wow. Okay. And now kind of leading into that, and, obviously nationwide, we've had a huge inventory crunch, like you said, about 50 offers per house nationwide. And whether you're a realtor looking to, buy a home to live in, or an investor, there just seems to be a huge supply crunch nationwide. And I think some experts have said it could be 2030 before that evens out. With that being said, like I said, I've been on your email list for a while, and every day, like clockwork, there's another property. I mean, how are you able to bring that inventory to your investors when there's others? I won't name names, but there's one that they might send me an email once or twice a month, and that's stretching it.
It's magic. No,
okay. All right. Next question.
yeah. It's all about relationships, right? And so being a family owned and operated business, relationships are at the backbone of everything that we do. And we have so much off-market inventory that we bring, but it's also about speed. And so when something does hit the open market, we are immediate, we jump on it. And a lot of people call us before they ever list anything. And a lot of what we are dealing with has never formally been listed, or it's being built specifically for our customers. And then the other great benefit of us being so large is our customers often sell, and they allow us to first dibs that out to our customers before they open market it. Because, a lot of people, they think they're going to follow this model and they do that. But I have investors who are in their 80s and their 90s. I have investors who they have something crazy come up with a child and they need to liquidate. Things happen every day. When you've got 1,400 customers, that happens. And so there's so many avenues to why we have the inventory that we do. On average, we're scoping about 20 properties a day, and we're blasting 4 to 6, 4 to 7. And so it's a lot of inventory, a lot. And we do both, regular single family and small multifamily. Today, I've got a property closing that's just under 60 units. And so we do a little bit of everything, but everything we sell has to fit our model, meaning that it has to be offsite management, able to be run remotely, so you don't have employment costs for having to have staffing. And so anything that fits the bill and is in those growth areas, we'll look at, we'll run the numbers, and we have our eyes on that before it ever comes out to the customer.
Wow. Okay. Very impressive. And now, obviously, kind of getting into the numbers, and I've touched base before my podcast, we've all kind of heard the RTV, or rent to value. 1% was the sweet spot for years. Lower rates, higher appreciation, that's kind of come down a little bit. Again, I won't name names, but I've seen some just ridiculously overpriced real estate. I ran the numbers on one. I was at a 0.5 rent to value, and like, I'm not even going to waste my time with this. But your listings, and I mean, they're, reasonable under the assumptions. They're, typically between 0.7 to 0.9 rent to value ratio. I'm sure some of that's with the relationships, but how are you able to hit those numbers so consistently that are more investor friendly without, going to, sub C minus properties or anything like that?
A lot of it is the model, right? So if somebody was talking to someone else in my market and buying in the heart of Dallas, they would be seeing those. And I'm seeing properties sell close to zero caps. It's insane. And it's only getting worse. I sat up at an event where they were talking about that we need to be prepared for zero cash flow, and we are buying solely on the appreciation gain. And I'm sitting there like, what are you talking about? Who's going to invest in multifamily nonetheless for a zero return? But this is what the gurus are up there saying.
Yeah.
And, there's a reason that we don't charge for our education. For me, it's a mission to make sure that people understand what truly you can do in our market. And what scares me is all of the misinformation out there that 0.4, 0.5, that's the best you can hope for, 0.3. And now you've got the big groups. You've got big nationwide companies coming in saying that they're going to buy rentals in DFW only in the expensive price points, $500,000, $750,000, $1 million. They just said they're going to come buy thousands of properties. Those rent returns are going to be maybe a third at best, maybe 0.3. So even the big guys are out there making these scary moves. I mean, look what happened to Zillow when they tried to buy here.
Yeah.
They underestimated the power of the buyer. And so it's all about making sure you have the right model. And if you have the right model and you follow the model, it works. So buying in the suburbs, buying things that are in the cheaper price points, making sure that you're following a property management process that sets you up to succeed. So like, for example, we do quarterly visits at our properties. We make sure the tenants are maintaining them. We make them fix things as we find them. And because of that, we can show and market our properties the last 2 months of every lease so that we can pre-lease it before the tenant vacates. And so we can virtually eliminate vacancy expense if the model is followed. And so there's a lot of little things that go into our numbers to be able to help us get where we are. By making sure the properties fit the look that we're going for and are always in great shape, we get top dollar rents, often above market numbers. Of course, the market's really strong, so that helps too. So there's a lot of things that go into play behind the scenes that help us pick what we're going to present and what we're not. But my favorite part of what we do is our new construction. And the reason being is we do infill new construction, which is very unique. And the reason why that's important is there's a couple reasons. First and foremost, you talked about property taxes. If you buy a brand new home surrounded by other brand new homes, when the tax assessor comes in January 1st, it's very easy for them to figure out what that home is worth and charge based on full value. When we're working in infill, we're in the middle of existing neighborhoods where some homes are being demoed and rebuilt, some are being remodeled, some it's vacant land. And so when they're trying to value your brand new home or your renovated home, they have no idea how to value it because it's a big mishmash. And so what we find with that is artificially lower property tax bills. And that's why pretty much everything I do is infill. And if you think that that's a small savings, we're talking about the difference between $200 a month and $400 or $500 a month sometimes. So it's significant. Secondary, new construction helps you keep your costs down. You've got brand new systems, builder warranties, you've got newer homes, attracting a better quality tenant. There's a lot of reasons why new construction is a great model. And so I have customers that they do riskier plays like I do, and we're doing remodels and all sorts of things. But 95% of our customers are making their wealth just on new or almost new construction. Okay. And that's really quite incredible.
Wow. Yeah, I think we've been, spoiled with the HGTV shows where they think, oh, anyone can flip a house and make $100,000. And you're starting with a new construction, you're not going to tear out this wall that has mold damage or a foundation issue or whatever the major issues would be. So now maybe as we kind of get towards the end of this, Leah, just kind of thinking holistically, I mean, obviously, the market's been booming, Dallas-Fort Worth is booming, still have historically low interest rates and a lot of, good tailwinds for investors out there. But just kind of taking a step back, how did or did certain events affect you in relation to COVID-19, as well as the I think it was February 2021 with the big power grid freeze, whatever that was called. Did either of those affect you, your investors, your properties, et cetera?
COVID was interesting. COVID was something that I think a lot of people, they got afraid, and they were afraid to properly handle their properties. And so I sat on a lot of meetings and groups and just, like big talks of people trying to figure out how to navigate it. And I said the same thing all along. It's business as usual. Okay. And if we get struck down and we get told we can't, then that's one thing. But we're not going to stop doing walkthroughs. We're not going to stop evicting people. We're not going to stop filing, and we're going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And we did. And so we did evict a lot more people than usual. And that, I think, was kind of across the board for everyone. And there was a very short period in the beginning where evictions were halted. Sure. And one of the things that came out of COVID is we were already very pro portfolio lending with our lenders, because you get great terms and you don't have to put it in your personal name. But a lot of people were still utilizing Fannie Mae against my advice. And then Fannie Mae had over and above requirements on a federal level for evictions in the beginning. And so that really helped kind of solidify this, no, buy in an LLC, you're going to get great terms, it's going to be better for you. But in reality, once they came out with Texas rent relief, which came out pretty early, they were just handing away money. It was crazy. And so really where we saw the biggest shift was when Texas rent relief closed. So Texas rent relief was paying people thousands and thousands of dollars to their landlords to catch them up and pay future rents and utilities. And so most of our people who were delinquent, rent relief caught them up. If they filled out the paperwork, they pretty much qualified. Okay. And so where we saw the one big chunk of big evictions was actually the beginning of this year when rent relief ended, and all those people who had been counting on rent relief, and then we got them on their next month's money that was due. If they didn't pay, we immediately filed and kicked them out. Okay. So our total collection balance right now is way less than it was even going into COVID. And that's because all of us firmed up our evictions policies. We are even stricter now than what we were. And so I really don't see any resulting remnants from it other than the fear, right? The fear with those backed mortgages of what can they tell us again that we can and can't do. And so I again stand here very, very much a proponent of portfolio lending and company names, for liability, asset protection, all sorts of things, but also because if there is a future event, we want to make sure that they can't tell you what you can and can't do because of who backs your loan. Okay. Now, I will tell you that of every state in the US, I believe Texas handled it the best. We, of course, are a very conservative state in terms of our landlord policies. And so that went to our favor. And I had friends and colleagues in other states that, we'd be on a meeting and I'd be talking about what we were doing. And they'd be like, well, this doesn't apply to Texas. But it's just different. Every state's a little different. And that's one of the great things about states' rights and state laws is that we can invest in the areas that fit the model that we want for maximum. And it has nothing to do with politics, left or right, or any of that. It just has to do with who is business pro and who is not business pro. And so, in terms of the freeze, now that's an interesting one. Where we saw the effect was the expensive houses. Like my neighborhood, we all have those central sprinkler systems if the homes are more than a certain size. And of the 28 homes in my neighborhood, about 14 of them had burst lines and almost total losses from those sprinkler lines. Oh, and so that was really where we saw the problem. It was the pipes bursting, but we had winterized all of our vacant properties. We're very proactive. As you can tell, that's how we run our company. We're very type A and very proactive. And so we removed water from the lines of our vacants. We made sure the heat was on as long as owners would allow us to. Okay. So we really didn't have a lot of issues. Most of the areas that went without power, it was cycling. And so we had power on and off. The biggest thing that we saw was a lot of car accidents because people tried to go out with those, icy roads. And so it's different. They're from up north and they move here. They're like, oh, I've driven on snow, and not the same here because it hits the concrete and then it melts to a sheet of ice. Yeah. But, the thing about real estate is there's so many ways to hedge against loss. So for example, not this freeze, but the freeze a year before, I had a couple of my properties have the pipes freeze underneath the house. I have a lot of very old homes, and so they're pier and beam, and there's this exposure. And I filed insurance claims, and they did brand new plumbing for me. And so it just goes back to, if you properly hedge against your risk, generally you're not going to have a problem. And that's why these great insurance policies come in handy.
Okay, good to know. So, all right. Well, yeah, I can attest to myself. Years ago, I kind of wrote off DFW and even Texas in general, but I think I'm definitely going to add Texas to my list and probably going to be investing in the near future. If any of my listeners, Leah, are maybe interested in hearing more, either starting their investment portfolio or maybe expanding their investment portfolio, what's the best way to reach out and get some additional information?
Definitely. So you can visit our website at OmniKeyTexas.com, or you can call us at 833-OmniKey. Or if email is best for you, it's investments@OmniKeyTexas.com.
I actually got a phone number. I don't get that very often. And it's like, does anyone make phone calls anymore?
We get about 400 calls a day.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, all right. So, yes, I will include the website, the number, and the email address in the show notes for all of you listening to this while working out or driving. So, all right. Well, thanks again, Leah, for sharing your knowledge and obviously your time, and hope to have you on in a future episode.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to share, rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. For more updates, check out www.wealthandfreedomnexus.com. Remember, nothing on this show should be considered tax, legal, investment, or professional advice. This show is produced solely for educational and informational purposes. Please consult an appropriate and licensed tax, legal, real estate, or business professional for specific advice for your situation. For distribution or publication rights or media interviews, please contact the host.